Well, let's talk to our studio guests, political activist Joseph Danquah and social commentator Dorcas Gwata. Thank you very much indeed to both of you for coming in. Dorcas, an extraordinary week for the government in Kenya. Beyond these sort of accusations that we're hearing now of 166 students unaccounted for, they've had protests from, both the Somalis and the Kenyans, and of course, the continuing problem of Al-Shabaab. It is, and it's a national grief, Charles, to observe a country in such sorrow. It really is very distressing. It's a very sensitive time at the moment. This is an emergency. This is a crisis. At any given time, we don't know how many students are going to be on a campus. They are still recovering bodies. There are families who still haven't met their children. There are families who are still being reunited. The family are very, very traumatized. Is it responsible for this university head to say that a number of students were taken by Al-Shabaab? It's slightly responsible. It will be a very sensitive issue because remember we had the Boko Haram crisis where children were taken away. In my view, one person taken away, killed by Al-Shabaab in Kenya is far too many. It's a very, very sensitive time, but we need to have responsible reporting because people are very much observing the grief. Isn't that all the more reason, Joseph, why the universities have to come out and make it quite clear that there are students who are still missing?
Yes, they have to, because they have to account for every single person who was on campus. I think that the students have been failed deeply by the government and the society at large. I mean, before this attack, there were reports of suspicious people within the area and within the campus, which the government should have acted upon. And I believe that this is a failure on the part of the Kenyatta government, because they've had 2 years previous, there was an attack on the mall. And this shows that they are a country under siege by the Al-Shabaab. So they have to take security very serious. And this is something which other African countries need to learn from, that you have to be proactive than reactive to situations.
Now, Dorcas, you're very good at reading the signs of developments in Africa. I mean, what should we read into all these? First of all, the protests, the calls, over security, the concern and calls for the West to come in to help fight this insurgency. I mean, it seems almost as if Kenya is lurching towards instability. It is, and anybody in Kenya is going to think, well, what about my safety? What about my future? This is a regional issue. Let's be clear. It's too big an entity for us to just leave it with Kenyatta Uhuru. He has had, by the way, gentleman is right, a lot more attacks, terrorist attacks, under his leadership, on a backdrop of his own historic tribal issues. So there are quite complex issues going on in Kenya. He needs to be able to demonstrate strategically with results that he can reassure the safety of all Kenyans. It's a very complex case we have here because you've got a very big Somalian Kenyan community within Kenya who belong in Kenya. They will not be driven away. They are Kenyans by identity and birth. So reconciling those two communities is going to be very important. But I think this is a regional issue which needs global intervention. It's bigger than Uhuru alone. It's bigger than Eastern Africa alone. And if we leave this alone, this could spill out into the wider continent. And of course, the immediate concern, Joseph, remains the whereabouts of these 166 students who may or may not have been kidnapped by Al-Shabaab. What do you think is going to happen now? I mean, do you think the authorities are going to claim that they've broken the new security law and information and that they're exacerbating fears about terrorism?
Yeah, that could be possible, that the government is now on the back foot. They have seemed to not have carried out their duties to protect the students. So therefore, they'll be on the back foot, and they could use that security law. But looking at the bigger picture, the government and the university officials need to collaborate and to sit down and to see who's missing and who is alive and who is dead. They need to take their time and stop going around giving sweeping statements. And to further add to it, there's a need for Africans to now be inward looking towards their solutions, because since this has happened, there's not been much support from outside the African continent. And even within African continent, the AU, we have not heard much about them. The EU has not said much about them. And Africans need to look inward, because this is a lesson for us. If we are in crisis, we are left alone. So we need to start looking at ourselves and start building blocks, security blocks, and cooperation when it comes to security. This is very vital.
And you made a very good point there about responsible statements coming from university staff, because we've got the Education Minister, Joseph Kamenyi, producing figures disputing those claims, saying that the number of people enrolled and the number of those rescued seem to fit what they have sort of originally. I mean, where does this sort of dispute leave families that are still looking for their loved ones?
It's a frightening situation. And I sit and watch this on the news and I think, here we have students, tomorrow's leaders. These are students who could have carried the country tomorrow, and it's a huge attack. His comments are irresponsible to the national grief. The point really, Charles, I wanted to make is how big is Al-Shabaab and how much are they scaling up within the country? I mean, they've got a lot of clout. They're gaining grounds. They've obviously got a lot of intelligence within the country. And if this is not contained, this could spread. Not spread within Kenya, but spread within the borders, and we've already seen attacks in Tanzania, very possibly.
That's a very good point, because the new claims now are focusing on the Dadaab refugee camp, where there have been suggestions that Al-Shabaab is using that camp as a training and coordination center, and that it should be closed down. The UNHCR disputes that. And so do other sort of agencies. But the fact, of course, is that people are being radicalized, which is why these sort of attacks appear to be on the increase.
Yeah, because you see, the Al-Shabaab it was a youth wing of the Union of Islamic Courts, who ruled Somalia for a short time in 2006, who had a very extreme interpretation of Islam. And these youth are basically people who are wandering around the streets of Mogadishu, unemployed, very angry and very disillusioned. And when you get kids or young men of that caliber, they can be used as deadly weapons against society. And that's what you see what's happening in Eastern Africa at the moment.
Okay, for the moment, Joseph Danquah and Dorcas Gwata, thank you very much indeed.